In this guide, we'll be preparing you for Endgame Blue Mage content. To do this, we'll cover the following subjects. The Just the Bare Necessities build, consisting of spells learned in the open world as well as a few crucial spells from dungeons, namely Ram's Voice and Ethereal Mimicry. This build should enable you to do most 4-man content synced solo if you wish. It is always faster and easier to do it with 4 players, especially if you're all Blue Mages, but some players enjoy the option of doing it solo. I would recommend grabbing spells from trials and raids in the order of levels, so lower level ones are done before higher level ones. However, sometimes it can be beneficial to do certain ones first. For instance, if you want to heal primarily, then doing these particular encounters first may be a good idea. Thornmarch Heart for Palm Cure, Emanation for Stotram, and Alexander, Breath of the Creator, also known as A10 for Gobskin. Next, we'll talk about the Blue Mage Log, the main endgame target of Blue Mages. And then we will talk about proper endgame spellbook builds to tackle this content. This also includes builds for dealing with easier content, like, when available, farming irregular tomestones or mock tomes as they're commonly known. Then we talk about gear setups to accompany these endgame builds. And then we finish by talking about certain spell options that may not be part of any main build, but can be useful in specific circumstances. Now then, this build includes a combination of attacking, tanking, and healing tools that may be helpful when soloing content. It also somewhat denotes all the greatest hits of spells you should have access to early on in your spellbook adventure at max level. The only spells that you need to do a dungeon to pick up are Ram's Voice and Ethereal Mimicry, the first of which you should be able to solo Cutter's Cry for, with Basic Instinct, Mighty Guard, Wide Wind, 1000 Needles, and Blood Drain. Ethereal Mimicry may be significantly tougher to solo, however, you may be able to carefully pick off enemies before the boss with Ram's Voice and Ultra Vibration. After that, you mostly just need to survive until the spell is cast and then defeat the ad that used it. You do not need to defeat the boss to get the spell in this case. Some of the spells on this list are only useful in certain content. For instance, Basic Instinct can be cut out when in a group. 1000 Needles can be cut off if you go into content beyond level 40, and Choco Meteor is not particularly helpful in any non-open world content. If you are in a coordinated team of any capacity, you can also get rid of extremely specialized tools like Exuviation, Blood Drain, Toad Oil, Bad Breath, and even Mighty Guard and/or White Wind, depending on what role you fill and how many spell slots you need. You may be wondering why all these optional spells are so important to denote, considering how we already have 4 free slots to customize with. But there is a vast list of spells that are practically mandatory to bring, just like Ethereal Mimicry. You will get all those spells in time, but I will try to really underline the especially useful ones. Before going into all the more complex stuff, I want to thank the Blue Academy Discord for their resources, as well as helpful discussion on some of the following subjects in this guide. This is a great place to go if you want to focus more on Blue Mage content in general. I will provide a link in the description. Now, let's continue and talk a bit about what makes a spell good or even mandatory for a Blue Mage. You may have noticed that a lot of your GCD options do precisely 220 potency. This is the base number to aim for when judging a spell's value. Any GCD that can do more than 220 potency is worth a look, and every spell below that needs to validate itself by providing something else. For example, Sonic Boom validates itself by being a fast spell, allowing you to double weave alongside it. While Sharpened Knife also has this benefit, without doing less damage, Sharpened Knife loses value by being super close range. This is also why spells like Bristle and Whistle are not good to use unless they precede something that does an impressive amount of damage. For Bristle, this applies to Song of Torment, Matra Magic, and Ethereal Spark. For Whistle, it applies for Final Sting and specifically a Tinkle-empowered Triple Trident. On the other hand, oGCD options are in some capacity considered free damage, so you want as many oGCD attacks as you can cram into your build as possible. This is why the primal actions are so incredibly handy. The only measure to compare them against each other is if they share cooldown, like Garuda and Ifrit's Feather Rain and Eruption. We will get back to those two in particular a bit later actually. Next, what is the Blue Mage log? Just before you reach the capstone job quest at level 60, you unlock the Blue Mage log, which is a menu attached to your Blue Magic spellbook. Just like the Masked Carnival, the Blue Mage log has some weekly targets. The rewards are also very similar in that they both award money, tomestones of poetics, and allied seals. The way that the Blue Mage log works is that whenever you do a piece of content listed in the log with a full team of Blue Mages, completing it will check it off in the list and award the first time completion reward. The weekly targets can be done every week of course, but these also tend to be encounters not normally found in the log. You can see in the log if there is a Blue Mage group in the party finder from the party finder icon being lit in the log, making it easier to find groups of the duties you are missing. Before moving on, there are a few even higher ticket encounters to look for as a Blue Mage. These fights are difficult enough that even Blue Mages get pushed to their limits. For instance, to get the special Morbol mount, you need to clear the final encounter of each part of the Binding Coils of Bahamut and the Savage version of the final encounter of each part of Alexander, with a full Blue Mage group, and with Echo turned off. There is also a title reward for doing the same for the Omega Raid, but the main idea is that these are the hardest challenges you can face as a Blue Mage. Now that you're hopefully motivated with some really hard content to look forward to, let's look at some real endgame spellbook builds. First off, keep in mind that there is no perfect build for all content at the same time. You will almost certainly have to switch a thing or two around for two different encounters if you want to optimize. This means that while these builds I'm presenting have a few free slots to customize around, there may also be fights where actions in these builds are not useful in particular. With that in mind, let's start with this DPS build. Many of these actions you will see repeated for almost every build due to their universal strengths in being oGCDs or just significantly powerful GCDs. Before looking at an opener, I will introduce some of the more complicated actions. Nightbloom applies a 1 minute already bristle empowered Song of Torment, so over a 2-minute period you will only have to apply Song of Torment manually twice, as these two dots will not stack. While Serpanaka is an ability, using any GCD will cancel its self-boosting effect, so you should always cast Serpanaka 4 times back to back. Phantom Flurry is also an ability, but is a channel that does damage every second. Make sure to recast it at the very last moment to get as many damage ticks as you can out of it. In addition to Song of Torment, Matra Magic is also boosted by Bristle. Whistle only boosts physical attacks, which means you can cast Whistle in advance for a physical attack you wish to use, like Triple Trident, as long as all spells you use between are magical. Tinkle also boosts Triple Trident's base potency by 100 per hit, and since it hits 3 times, it triples this bonus. Combining Whistle and Tinkle with Triple Trident makes it another one of your strongest attacks. Off Guard is one of the more difficult to use actions. It doesn't stack, so in a raid you would optimally coordinate who uses it when, to keep it up as much as possible. If you are in an 8-man group, you can have half your raid switch off Guard for Peculiar Light to further boost magic damage, although this one is very close range. You may also be wondering why Cold Fog is on a list that isn't for tanking. Cold Fog is an incredibly strong option if you can time it with getting hit, for instance by a raid-wide attack. Depending on your timing, this gives you 4 to 5 instant GCDs of 400 potency. However, in a fight where you cannot reliably expect to get hit much, this spell quickly loses its value, especially since it costs a GCD of 0 damage to get started. Finally, Moonflute is an insanely powerful damage buff for Blue Mages, but it comes with the downside of locking you completely out of actions for 15 seconds after the 15-second burst. This means that Moonflute is only worth using if you can cram a lot of long cooldowns into its duration. So while it has no cooldown itself, you should use it mainly when you have as many of your long cooldowns available as possible. Serpanaka, Nightbloom, Phantom Flurry and Matra Magic comes to mind, so once every 2 minutes or so. The rest of the actions on this list are somewhat self-explanatory. Keep in mind that the Rose of Destruction includes a knockback, which can be annoying in dungeons. Sonic Boom is the default spammable attack due to the reasons I mentioned earlier. Now then, let's take a look at an opener. Up to 20 seconds before fighting starts, cast Whistle. Then 2 seconds before pull, cast Tinkle, followed by Moon Flute and weave J-Kick. Now cast Triple Trident, spending the Whistle, and weave Night Bloom. Then use the Rose of Destruction, weaving Feather Rain. Next, use Bristle, weaving Swiftcast and Glass Dance, followed by 4 Serpenaka back to back, and finish with Matra Magic into Shock Strike and then Phantom Flurry. Make sure to end Phantom Flurry before Moon Flute finishes. This then leads into the much harder part of the opener where you do nothing for 15 seconds. Remember, you can still run for your life in this time. Every 2 minutes, when your cooldowns are ready, you should redo as much of this opener again as possible for another burst. The main outliers will be Glass Dance and Triple Trident due to their cooldowns. For finishing off fights, you can do a similar combo of using every cooldown in your arsenal during Moon Flute, but in these situations you can round off with Whistle into Final Sting for an even bigger finish. Just try to make sure the fight will actually end. Also, never finish a fight with Final Sting if you want to learn the spell the boss can teach you. Now, I mentioned earlier we would talk about Eruption and Feather Rain. While these two attacks are pretty much identical in damage potential, Feather Rain dealing its damage some immediately and some as damage over time means that it does more consistent damage than Eruption. Additionally, Feather Rain's damage over time component also benefits from spell speed, as this stat also increases damage over time effect's power. The simple answer is that as long as Feather Rain's dot will do its full damage, it will do better than Eruption, on average. Next, let's look at the main healer build. The main difference is that the Triple Trident set and Matra Magic have been replaced by the main healing spells Palm Cure, Gobskin, Stotram and Angel's Snack, and also White Wind is added as an even bigger raid-wide heal, assuming you yourself are healthy of course. As the main healer, you may also sometimes want to refrain from using the full Moon Flute combo, as it will also lock you out of healing for 15 seconds. If you don't feel confident you will have any opportunity to use Moon Flute and don't need your extra slots for anything else, you can add back in the Triple Trident set of Whistle, Tinkle and Triple Trident. One particular example you can expect to add for certain fights is Exuviation, as it is the only way to remove debuffs on your team. It is common to also use an off-healer build, which is entirely the exact same build except for not bringing Gobskin and making use of this space for the Triple Trident set. Keep in mind that as long as at least one of the healers can heal, your team is likely to be just fine for 15 seconds, so you could just place the 2 healers' Moon Flutes. The reason only one healer brings Gobskin is because, just like Scholar and Sage shields, they will not stack, so it is better to only have one in the team. Now the tank build. The main differences to the other builds is that you replace the Rose of Destruction with Chelonian Gate, a very strong counterattack for tanks. We also replaced Moon Flute with Bad Breath, as some of its vast list of debuffs work on bosses and can help make those strong boss attacks more manageable. We also replaced Matra Magic with Dragon Force, another super strong defensive cooldown. We also choose to have Diamondback as a default skill on the list, the most powerful defensive spell. Just keep in mind that all 3 of these defensive cooldowns are spells, so they take a GCD to start. Blood Drain is added to compensate for the massive mana cost of using Diamondback, and Devour is like a permanent 20% bonus health for tanks as long as you use it on cooldown. Finally, we of course have Mighty Guard. To make space for all this, we have had to get rid of a few other options. Glass Dance being the weakest oGCD is cut, and Bristle being less powerful than Whistle, it has also been cut. Take note that there is one free slot, and these 2 actions aren't even the only good choices to put here. In fights with a lot of ads spawning throughout, White Wind can be used to generate a massive amount of enmity without chasing the enemies around, as an example. Finally, for things like Fate Farming and Mock Tomes, you can take any of these template builds and remove some of the options to make space for these much cheesier tools. Hydro Pull can easily bunch up all enemies, and then Ram's Voice can freeze them. Then using Ultra Vibration immediately wipes them all out. For bosses that may be immune to Ram's Voice, but not death spells in general, Missile can cut them down to size real fast. If 2 Blue Mages hit their missiles together in quick succession, the target will die due to server tick shenanigans too. You can also use Launcher for an AoE alternative to Missile, however, in most cases Ultra Vibration on your entire team should be just fine. For open world stuff, you may want to replace Sonic Boom with Choco Meteor, as long as your Chocobo companion is with you. Now, regarding gear sets. There are two types of builds, and both use the same spell lists, so don't worry about that. The Crit Det build focuses on the priority of critical hit, then determination, and then direct hit to maximize the damage of every action you use. This is great for DPS Blue Mages. The alternative SPS Det build instead goes for spell speed, then determination, and then direct hit. This spell speed build is great for all roles, and due to how many of the cheesy spells are affected by spell speed in some way, it is also great for that. In the ideal scenarios, the Crit Det build pulls just slightly ahead of the spell speed build, but we're talking less than 1%. The only significant difference in playstyle between the two builds is that the Crit Det build benefits from delaying Triple Trident to use during Moon Flute, while the spell speed build prefers to just use Triple Trident on cooldown. That's it. The gear options you have available to make this work are as follows, ranked from easy to hard to get. The augmented Skaven gear bought for Tomestones of Poetics, alongside the Mirage gear awarded from finishing the Blue Mage quest. Take note that the Blue Mage weapons awarded throughout that story having higher item levels also means you can meld more stats into them, but also that when your gear gets synced down, materia will stop working, so keeping around multiple canes of different item levels can be a wise decision. Next, and slightly tougher, you can use Omega gear from the Savage version of the third part of the Omega raids. Finally, and the absolutely most time consuming to do, is getting Elemental gear from Eureka. Yes, it is only item level 390, but the 5 materia slots easily make up for it, especially for spell speed sets. The lower intelligence and defense does not matter. Keep in mind that you can absolutely tank or heal just fine in a Crit Det set. All the content available to Blue Mages is doable as long as you use any of the gear I mentioned. Optimizing may make it easier though. If you want to know precisely what the best builds are with exact gear pieces, I will refer you to the Blue Academy Discord, where they have sets that they also keep up to date if something is discovered that may change it. Now, with the spellbooks and gear builds out of the way, let me just briefly explain the gameplay loop of each role. DPS Blue Mages are extremely focused on the Moon Flute burst, and depending on what sort of build you're working with, the main concern is knowing when Triple Trident should be used. Of course, using your primal abilities on cooldown and keeping Song of Torment up is important. As the boss reaches final sting range, you finish with the final Moon Flute burst, concluded with Whistle Final Sting. Healer Blue Mages have many of the same concerns as DPS Blue Mages, but in their case, sometimes not using Moon Flute even if the full burst is available can be wiser. Also, you will likely be casting a lot more healing spells instead of Sonic Boom, but overall, Healer Blue Mages are still DPS at heart. Tank Blue Mages are the strangest of the three. While they use Sonic Boom like the rest, in fights with a lot of heavy tank damage, Diamondback may get a lot of use, and the only way to keep up with that kind of mana upkeep is to use Blood Drain a lot. In these situations, adding White Wind for huge enmity generation can be helpful. Devour should also be used on cooldown for its health boost, and remember that Dragon Force and Chelonian Gate can be used instead of Diamondback when you don't need the full 90% to survive. Consider also that if you choose Bristle, you can use it before Chelonian Gate to get an even bigger burst out of that. I think that covers most of what you need to know to start, yet there's still more to say. Let's glance over some actions that can be situationally powerful. For healers and DPS, if a mechanic does an absurd amount of damage, taking Diamondback can be helpful. For instance, this is necessary to get the Cold Fog spell. In dungeons, it may be helpful to bring Toad Oil as a tank for the extra evasion while your group is still lining up the Ram's Voice. Frog Legs is your only option of a provoke, and can sometimes be mandatory to deal with the boss mechanic in a raid. Revenge Blast is an absolutely bonkers attack if you can somehow be near death safely while using it. Stotram when used while not a healer is actually better for damage on 4 or more targets, and its radius is huge. In fact, when asking about it, I was suggested multiple savage and extreme encounters where this was helpful. There's also nothing wrong with things like a DPS bringing White Wind, or even a tank bringing Moon Flute if you see a way to make use of it. Remember that tanks should turn off Mighty Guard before using Final Sting. As I said early on, there is no perfect build for Blue Mages, and it all comes down to what you need. That is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to see more guides like this one from me, you can subscribe to get notified whenever I post a new video. Also, if you have any questions or anything to add, please leave a comment down below. Again, thanks to Blue Academy for their tips and resources in the making of this video. I highly recommend their Discord if you want to really dive deep on Blue Mage. Fun fact, the road to the optimal builds and suggestions we see today has been thorough. I remember a time where the spell speed build suggested stacking extra dots with spells like Aqua Breath. There was also a time where whether Song of Torment was even worth using alongside Nightbloom was considered. Bonus fun fact, when Blue Mages reached level 70, it became possible to one-shot Shiva Extreme with a fully prepped critical direct hit Final Sting, which is shockingly consistent due to the DPS Mimic stat boost. No other job can one-shot Shiva Extreme, not even at level 90,